In a quiet Montana field, two young lovers were found, their dreams ended by a single bullet. For decades, their names faded into dusty case files. But in a small laboratory, a strand of DNA began to speak, bridging 65 years of silence. How did science reach into 1956 to expose a killer no one ever suspected? In 1956, in rural Montana, two young people vanished. Lloyd Dwayne Bogle, 18 years old, and Patricia Kalitzke, 16 years old, were last seen leaving a community dance near the small town of Powell. Nestled between rugged valleys and dusty highways. Though their lives moved in different circles, they shared a spark of restless hope. Lloyd worked odd jobs, Patricia aspired to become a teacher. No one remembers them as deeply connected, merely two souls crossing paths on an ordinary summer night. At mid-century America's edge, isolated communities trusted local law enforcement, but investigative tools were rudimentary. Detectives carried notebooks, fingerprint kits, and little else. No DNA, no national databases, just follow the evidence and eyewitness memory. In this setting, two missing persons quickly turned into a homicide case no one understood. When their bodies were discovered days later near a back road, the police arrived to confusion and sorrow. How could this happen here? Neighbors exchanged whispered theories, attended vigils, and demanded answers. But in a town where everyone knew one another, suspicion burned silently. Detectives scoured fields, lifted prints, interviewed dozens, but no suspect emerged. Key evidence was fragile and degrading under Montana's sun. The case faded into oblivion, filed away in dusty drawers as a cold case. Meanwhile, Lloyd's and Patricia's families held on to grief, their names doubling as local legend, the perfect unsolved story whispered at kitchen tables and barbershops. As decades passed, the crime haunted shadows, until science, decades later, offered the promise of answers that the world in 1956 lacked. It was just after 9 p.m. on January 2, 1956, when Lloyd Dwayne Bogle, an 18-year-old airman stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and his 16-year-old girlfriend Patricia Kalitzke pulled away from Pete's Drive-In in Great Falls, Montana, their laughter carried away by the winter night air. Local papers later noted that the two young people appeared, in high spirits, clothes pressed and clean, ready for a quiet evening together. They headed for a stretch of road beyond Wadsworth Park, near the Sun River, a known lover's lane tucked beneath the quiet hills northwest of town. As the car's engine hummed and the headlights lit the riverbank, the chill of the Montana night settled in. Someone, later said, thought they heard the radio still playing, the car lights still on, but by morning, no one would emerge. On the morning of January 3, three boys hiking along the river made the grim discovery. Lloyd's body, face down beside the open door of his car. He had been shot once in the head. His hands were tied behind his back, his own belt looped as restraints. The ignition switch, radio, and lights remained on. Money and a camera, valuable possessions, were still in the vehicle. Detectives protested that they saw no forced entry, no sign of a struggle inside the car, no theft. Everything looked staged. Later that afternoon, the search widened. On January 4, a county road worker found Patricia's body lying at the bottom of an embankment, off a gravel road north of Great Falls. She had been shot in the head as well, and evidence indicated that she had suffered sexual assault. Detectives concluded that the two killings were linked, both victims found with fatal head wounds, both young, both in areas only minutes apart. Local reporters called them Lover's Lane slaying victims. A wide-scale search ensued, deputies scoured nearby farms, interviewed dozens of residents, and combed through files of missing persons. Early theories suggested a robbery gone wrong, or perhaps a jealous rival. Some suspected local gang activity, Others whispered about outsiders passing through town. But each scenario collapsed under closer inspection. The belt binding Lloyd and the untouched valuables made robbery unlikely. The absence of motive puzzled them. Witnesses recounted hearing a car that night, but none could place the two again after their departure from the drive-in. One neighbor recalled hearing footsteps near the riverbank, then a gunshot that cracked through the silence, but when deputies arrived, they found nothing. Another said she saw a lone horseman riding in the distance, only hours before the bodies were discovered, but the lead went nowhere. In small-town Montana, where everyone knew someone, any stranger had stood out, and yet, no one claimed to know the shooter. As dawn broke, investigators by flashlight weighed the possibilities. Could this be an accident? A date gone wrong? A target of unknown hate? The staging of the car and the bound hands pointed away from the accident. The lack of theft dispelled robbery. No one emerged to claim vengeance or love gone wrong. Difficulty mounted. The only piece of physical evidence, a swab from Patricia's body, sat in a slide, untouched for decades. Investigators protested that they saw no forced entry, no clear suspect profile, nothing truly linked a suspect. Over the months, detectives developed more than 35 suspects. Among them, local Air Force personnel, an itinerant horse trainer, and even the notorious gangster, James "Whitey" Bulger, who had lived in Great Falls in the early 1950s. Each lead fizzled. Fingerprints yielded no match in the ancient card file. Blood type testing could only exclude, not convict. The killer moved freely through memory and shadow. The case began to freeze in time, a young couple lost, a town shaken, and evidence locked away in aging cabinets. By the end of 1956, the case had become a whisper. Families carried sorrow instead of answers. Lloyd's older brother later said, he heard the questions in his own home for decades. Why didn't someone ask him sooner? Meanwhile, Patricia's parents kept vigil for their daughter's return, only to live in the ache of absence. The evidence, the files, the outlines of suspicion, all collected and then forgotten. The puzzle remained incomplete, no suspects named, no motive known, no closure offered. And that first, chilling truth remained: the killer vanished and the trail grew colder with each passing year. The investigation into the deaths of Lloyd Dwayne Bogle and Patricia Kalitzke began under the harsh winter light of January 1956, and carried an urgency that belied the small-town setting. On January 3, young boys discovered Bogle's body beside his car on a lover's lane near the Sun River, still running, lights and radio on, his hands tied behind his back and a single bullet wound in the head. The next afternoon, a county road worker found Kalitzke's body dumped at the bottom of a steep embankment north of Great Falls, also shot in the head and sexually assaulted. In those first hours and days, detectives set in motion the investigative practices of the era. They combed the car for fingerprints, dusted the belt binding Bogle's wrists, photographed the scene in stark black and white contrast, and interviewed friends and school classmates of both victims. Investigators logged every minor detail: the car's engine still running in the cold, no forced entry, no obvious theft of money or valuables. It felt calculated. Investigators protested that they saw no forced entry, nothing truly linked a suspect, one archive noted. Over the next several weeks, the investigation followed dozens of leads. Officers questioned servicemen from nearby Malmstrom Air Force Base, where Bogle had been stationed, interviewed local teenagers, and catalogued every stranger seen that weekend near Wadsworth Park and the gravel road. One neighbor claimed to hear distant footsteps near the riverbank at dusk. Another recalled seeing a lone rider on a dark horse near the site just hours before the bodies were found. But for each lead that flickered to life, suspicion cooled equally quickly. Standard forensic tools offered little traction, blood type testing showed compatibility with broad categories, hair comparison remained visual and subjective, and the car's fingerprints returned no match in the state database. The case then became a cautionary tale of investigative limitations. As months lengthened into years, the files grew thick but the breakthroughs did not arrive. Evidence slides and coroner's notes were stored, but key physical material lacked modern handling and magnification standards. Technicians recorded the presence of sperm cells during Kalitzke's autopsy, but in 1956, long before DNA profiling, it was merely a curious footnote. Fingerprint cards were filed away, bullet fragments removed from a cottonwood tree remained untested. Some samples degraded under Montana's shifting seasons, freezing dry winters followed by brief humid summers. Others sat untouched in storage trays, unreviewed for decades. By the late 1960s the case was formally cold. No arrests, no charges, no verdicts. For 65 years the murdered young couple haunted a region where the snow drifts masked unanswered questions, and the cascade of leads became static. Investigators retired, local news moved on, and a plaque commemorating the case in the Great Falls History Museum quietly noted that the files remained open but inactive. The revival began in 2012, when John Cadner, a detective at the Cascade County Sheriff's Office, opened the case anew. Armed with cold case folders, aerial photographs of the Wadsworth Park area, farm directories from the 1950s and local archival materials, Cadner pieced together what earlier detectives could only document. He identified every person living within a mile of the crime sites, mapped missing property transfers, and digitized crime scene photos that once sat in filing cabinets. But the transformation truly occurred when the preserved forensic sample from Kalitzke's autopsy, a microscopic slide containing a sperm cell not belonging to Bogle, was retested in 2019 by Bogle technology under modern, high-density genetic profiling. That DNA profile, when uploaded to public genealogy databases, generated a family tree. Using obscure matches, investigators traced branches of the unknown profile across dozens of relatives and zeroed in on one man. Kenneth Gould, who lived a mile from Kalitzke's home in 1956, worked corralling horses in the area, and died in 2007. Once the genealogical lead was established, Cadner's team reached out to Gould's surviving children for consented DNA samples, which produced a familial match strong enough to satisfy investigators that Gould was the most likely offender. Property records revealed Gould sold his Montana land within a month of the murders and moved states, behavior that now looked far less ordinary. That breakthrough set off a cascade of re-interviews. Witnesses long forgotten were questioned again. The boy who found Bogle's car motioned to a faded photograph of a horseman. The county records clerk found a receipt for a shotgun cleaned and sold at the time. Detectives compared narrative timelines, matching grazing records with hours of darkness, and checking local phone logs for calls placed near Vineyard Road. What had once been isolated clues now formed a pattern. The victim's car untouched, no forced entry, the killer familiar with the terrain, signs of proximity, trust, and opportunity. The genealogical evidence provided the only concrete link, everything else finally made sense. By June 2021, the Cascade County Sheriff's Office publicly closed the case. The statement read, "Though Kenneth Gould is deceased, the evidence is clear. This is as good as we're ever going to get. For a community that once whispered of a Lover's Lane tragedy, the case now rests in the annals of forensic genealogy history, one of the oldest cold murders solved with science in the United States. It would take more than 6 decades before the mystery that haunted Great Falls, Montana, finally unraveled." By 2019, advances in forensic genealogy had transformed cold case work. The preserved semen sample collected from Patricia's body back in 1956, once useless, was now the key to unlocking a forgotten killer's identity. Using a genealogy database, investigators painstakingly traced partial DNA matches through distant relatives, constructing a complex family tree that pointed in one shocking direction. Kenneth Gould, a man who had once lived just miles from where the young couple had died. Gould, a ranch worker and family man, had never been on law enforcement's radar. He died in 2007, long before his name ever surfaced. But in 2021, after exhuming his remains, DNA extracted from his bones produced an undeniable match. The same genetic profile found on Patricia's body belonged to him, ending one of Montana's oldest unsolved murders. There would be no arrest, no trial, no perp walk through flashing cameras. Yet the confirmation carried the weight of a conviction. Investigators publicly declared the case closed, finally identifying the man responsible for the brutal execution of Lloyd and the assault and murder of Patricia. The announcement made national headlines: DNA solves 65-year-old lover's Lane murder. The revelation sent ripples through the small Montana community. Some residents were stunned that the killer had lived quietly among them, raising children, attending church, seemingly ordinary. Others were haunted by the what if forensic DNA had existed in 1956? Could other lives have been spared, other families spared the same pain? For the victims' relatives, the news brought a bittersweet form of justice. Patricia's surviving family members, now elderly, expressed relief that her name could finally rest beside a known truth. "We waited our whole lives," one cousin said. "We never thought this day would come." For Lloyd's family, closure came with deep sorrow, his bright military career and young love frozen in time, yet his story no longer defined by mystery. Law enforcement officials called the case a turning point. It demonstrated not only the endurance of evidence but the power of persistence. Cold case detectives across the country pointed to Bogle and Kalitzke's resolution as proof that no case is ever truly dead, only waiting for science to catch up. This case became a landmark in the evolution of forensic genealogy. It showed that even the faintest biological traces, carefully preserved in old envelopes and evidence boxes, could someday speak louder than any witness. The techniques pioneered here would soon help solve other decades-old murders across the United States. And yet, the story leaves lingering questions. Kenneth Gould took his secrets to the grave. Why did he target Lloyd and Patricia? Was it a moment of rage, jealousy, or pure opportunity? Investigators will never know. What remains are two young lives cut short, a town forever changed, and the enduring reminder that in the end, time itself can be an investigator unforgiving, but patient. From a single strand of DNA, voices long silenced finally spoke again. What began as a lover's lane mystery in 1956 ended in the age of genetic genealogy, proof that time can delay justice, but it cannot erase it. In the quiet hum of the Montana plains, where the wind still moves across the same fields, where Lloyd and Patricia once laughed, their story found its ending, not in a courtroom, but in a lab. It took 65 years, countless dead ends, and one fragment of preserved evidence to restore their names to truth. And with it, came a lesson: every piece of evidence tells a story, even when no one is left to listen. The Bogle-Kalitzke case stands as a reminder that behind every unsolved file lies a heartbeat, waiting to be heard again. Today, forensic genealogy continues to rewrite cold case history. Hundreds of families now live with answers once thought impossible. Yet, for every solved mystery, thousands remain locked in dusty boxes, trapped by time, waiting for the moment when science and persistence finally meet. Do you think there are still killers hiding behind history's shadows, crimes like this, waiting for DNA to reveal their truths? Share your theory in the comments. And if you believe that every story deserves its ending, subscribe to this channel. Join us as we uncover more true crime cases where science catches up with time, and justice whispers through the years.